first time doing the Worthington Interfaith Neighbors Film Festival this way. So I really appreciate all of you being with us, and hey, giving us a try. I mean, we figured if we couldn't go to the MAC, we had to figure out some way to make this happen. And so I'm really excited to have each of you with us. I hope you watched the movie. If by chance you didn't get to, I think after the discussion, you'll definitely want to watch it if you haven't had a chance to. So just know that it's one you'll want to follow up with, I'm sure. And just to remind everybody, the next movie is Life Ahead. We will have the discussion on March 7th. So this will give you between now and March 7th to watch the movie at your own leisure, and then join us for the discussion. And we will do the same format with Zoom as we're doing today. A couple housekeeping things. Once we start, because our speaker is going to be speaking with some slides, I was going to ask that everybody, if you'll just take your video and your mute off, you're still there. When we do that, then that way we can focus on her and her slides. And then as soon as we come to the question and answer, I would just ask everybody to come back and put your video on. And then if you have a question or you want to have a discussion with the group, just raise your hand. And that way, if we have duplicate people, we don't have people talking over each other. And I'll just unmute you as your turn comes up. The other thing I would encourage you as we go along and we listen to Linda speak, and share some of her information, use the chat. You know, if you get some ideas or questions or comments, go ahead and put it in the chat, because I'll be watching that, and we'll make sure that we cover all that also in and around the question and answer time. So that's kind of how we'd like to work this evening. And then our speaker, I think most of you know Linda. She has been in Worthington for a long time. We were just discussing, I didn't realize she had been here as long as she has. But I got to know her once we started Worthington Interfaith Neighbors, just going to different programs that we were going to. And that's when I got to know her. And also her husband, Joe, who actually spoke at our Sharing Our Stories last week. I think a lot of you know Joe. So Linda has been a professor, distinguished research professor. Her work has focused on faith and cultural interests. She teaches film studies and has been leading film discussion groups for decades. She's an author of 5 books. And I have to say, I keep thinking I'm going to get them all read, but I haven't. I have read 2 of them. Wonderful. Her latest is Belief Without Borders, Inside the Mind of the Spiritual, but Not Religious. And that's the one that I have not gotten to read yet. A longtime Worthington resident, as I said, she's married to Joseph Moss, who was recently installed as the Worthington Vice Mayor, and they have 3 children. She also started a business, or her own, I guess you'd call it a business, called healthybeliefs.org. And it was a way to help her get out about her books and discussions and different things. So I encourage you to go check that out. And you know, I have to say too, I have wanted Linda to speak with us for probably 5 years. So I'm glad retirement came. Because when retirement comes, it seems to help some of us have a little bit more time to do things. So we just are thrilled to death to have Linda here with us tonight. So I would say, take it away, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Well, I'll have to be Linda M and you're Linda K, because we're both Linda. And I think we were getting confused by that at first. Well, I'm going to give you some background information on the film, because when I saw it, I don't know how you felt, but when I saw it first, I wasn't clear. These people look alike. They're all speaking Russian, I'm pretty sure. Why are they fighting with each other? It just, it did not make sense to me. So I did a whole bunch of research, as I normally do, and tried to figure out what was going on. So I want to give you some background information, and I'll put up some maps and some slides, which I hope will not be boring because it'll really open up the whole movie to you. It'll really make sense. So that's what I hope to do. And again, if you have questions, feel free to write them in the chat box. When I put the slides up, I won't be able to see your chat, but when I come back to gallery view, I'll be able to see your chat questions, and Linda Kay is going to keep track of them anyway. So I hope you've all seen the film, but if you haven't, I'll give you a little summary of the plot as we go along, but and just to remind you if you have seen it. So the first time I saw it, several times, because the first time I saw it, I'm like, what is going on here? I just don't get it. So let me give you a little background. And some of this you'll know, but I'll fill it in with Abkhazia and Georgia and Chechnya and all that. In the late 1980s, you probably remember that Gorbachev loosened Soviet control over the countries of Eastern Europe. Well, as we know, that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union and its tight control over those countries in Eastern Europe. So let's look at a map of what okay, it says you disable participant screen sharing.
No, I did not. Let me try it again.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I never did a presentation on Zoom, so forgive me for my
Well, no, that's my fault. It was set. I don't know why it's not doing it.
Okay, can you
Let me
reset
just
it?
do it again.
Okay.
1 second.
Well, anyway, what I'm going to do is show you a map of the former Soviet Union. Then I'll show you a smaller map about some of the countries that were involved, because when the Soviet Union collapsed and communist control over these countries, pretty much went away, there was a lot of fighting. Gorbachev allowed for voting for elections, which was unusual. And then some of the countries started disputing each other, like who was in control. In some places, the Soviets tried to prevent democratization, like in 1981, Lithuania and Latvia. So they tried to keep control, but they weren't very successful at it. I mean, it sounded like a good thing, Gorbachev hoping to democratize, but in some places, really, really severe violence resulted, and that's what we're seeing in this movie, which is the 1992-3 Abkhaz-Georgian War. Let's see if this works now.
Yeah, try it.
Okay, that looks good. That looks good. Here we are. Okay. Okay. So everyone can see this, right? So you can see this is what the country looked like before the Soviet collapse of the Soviet Union. And, it's a huge area. It's amazing that they controlled this much. Tonight we're going to think about Estonia, which is number 2. And we're going to think about Georgia, which is number 8. It's pretty far away, actually. So, and then the other countries won't be as important to us, but those two are. So I want to show you another little map. Here's Estonia, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And then Abkhazia, which is the movie is set in, is way down here. That's a long way. And why are these people, Estonians, way down here in Abkhazia? Abkhazia is part of Georgia, which was part of the Soviet Union. So, so when the Red Army was withdrawn, I'll just stop sharing for a minute. When the Red Army was withdrawn, there was a lot of violence, and you remember the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. This all happened around that period of time. Many of the states that I just showed you demanded their independence, and they won it eventually. Unfortunately, local violence erupted in some countries that were formerly held by the Soviet Union. Now, a matter of interest is that during this time, President George Bush recognized 12 of these states as independent republics. But in Georgia, which is what we're going to think about tonight, things didn't work out that well. And in fact, the U.S. ended up not recognizing Georgia right away. So I showed you some of the countries that were involved in this big change. So the film takes place in Abkhazia, and I had to consult a map because, frankly, I wasn't sure where that was. And so that's why I thought I would help us all, get a sense of the locale. So It takes place during the war between Abkhaz and Georgia, although Abkhazia was part of Georgia. So let's look at Abkhazia now. Okay. Okay, so here's this is a nice clear map. See, here's Russia. Can you see my pointer here when I do this? Here's
Yes.
Russia. Here's Abkhazia, and there's Georgia. So Georgia's huge, and they felt that Abkhazia was part of them. But the Abkhazians wanted to be independent. So the mystery is, what did Russia do? Did Russia just let it all happen? No, a civil war came about here. And it ended up that Russia, oddly enough, supported Abkhazia instead of this huge country of Georgia. So we have Russians, in this movie, we have Russian mercenaries, we have Abkhazian separatists, and we have Georgian fighters. They're all in the movie. So Abkhazia lies, as you can see, on the Black Sea and south of the Greater Caucasus Mountains, which, if you remember, is where Ahmed came down from, in northwest Georgia. So the dispute was, is this an independent country or is it part of Georgia? The Soviet Union, as I said, supported Abkhazia's independence. And you might say, well, why did they do that? It doesn't sound like they needed to. Well, it may have been a way to exert their control in the new Soviet Federation, because there was a new federation. They tried to keep some control of these countries. But Georgia wanted to claim Abkhazia too. So in the end, during all these battles, Georgia effectively lost control over Abkhazia, and that led to the war. So you'll see that mercenaries came from Russia to fight for Abkhazia. So they were, as Ahmed, in the movie, Ahmed was a mercenary. So let's see if we could look at that. There were Russian volunteers that came all the way from Chechnya, which I'll show you in a minute. It's far, to fight for the Abkhazian separatists, which kind of seems counterintuitive. But Ahmed and Ibrahim, who are in the movie, they're the first people you see, warriors. They were from Chechnya. They were Russian. So here's a better picture of it. Now you can see Chechnya. Abkhazia is way over here. This might look like a short distance, but it's very far. And it looks like Ahmed got in his truck, or maybe a whole bunch of Chechnyans got in their truck, and they were being paid. It wasn't like they loved Abkhazia. They probably had never been there. I mean, it's way up here. But they drove all the way through to get here. And you'll notice at in the end, the last scene, which we'll talk about, Ahmed gets back in his truck and he drives all the way back. So these were mercenaries, and Russia was happy for them to do that. Okay, now let's go back and ask another question. What's this thing with the Estonians? Why are the Estonians involved in any of this? When you think about it, it doesn't make sense. I showed you that map a minute ago. Estonia is really far from Abkhazia. It's a good 1,700 miles. If you remember, the doctor was one of the last people to flee, and he said he was driving to the airport. So you could literally drive there, but it would take a very long time. So why are Estonians in Abkhazia? Now we go back to the 1800s. The original Abkhazians were driven out by the Tsar. They were expelled or they left when the region became part of the Russian Empire. So this area had been controlled by the Russian Empire for a long time. And in the 1880s, the Tsar decided to get rid of the native Abkhazians, and they got expelled. There was a lot of violence, and but now the country was fairly unpopulated. So the Tsarist regime of the Russian Empire began to repopulate the area with Christians, because the Tsar was Christian. So here's where religion starts to come in, or where it becomes important in this story. So where were they going to find more Christians? Estonia, oddly enough. So the peasants in Estonia were promised land, and a lot of them thought that was really attractive. So they made this long trek. Now, I don't know how they got there, whether they moved them themselves, whether they walked, I don't know. But here you can see how far it is in this slide. Okay, so first of all, Estonia is practically Scandinavian. Even the language sounds Scandinavian. So I mean, they're practically in Finland or Sweden, Norway. You wonder why they weren't one of the Scandinavian countries. But they were invited to go all the way down to Georgia. Let's see if we can see that. Okay, so you can see that here's Georgia, here's Abkhazia. This is a long way. So they were invited, given land, to come all the way down here to repopulate as Christians because the Tsar wanted that. So, 1,700 miles. Now, when they got to Abkhazia, they created their own villages. The main villages that they established were Salme and Estanka. I don't know where this film takes place. It seems like a small village. Salme later on had a name change, but from some of the pictures I've seen, it wasn't that little. But perhaps they were in the outskirts of Salme, and Salme was one of the main villages that they lived in. And it was founded in 1884 by Estonian resettlers. So this is all happening in the late 1800s. Okay, so by 1989, right before this war took place, there were a lot of Estonians there. They had 1,659 inhabitants in that village, just in that village of Salme. Mostly they were Estonians. And then there were some Armenians, some Georgians, and some Russians. So you can see that if a war is going to break out and it's going to be about ethnicity, the people that were probably living together just fine suddenly are finding themselves on opposite sides. And if you remember when, I'll go through the plot in a minute, but if you remember when one group of soldiers came and they knew Ivo, they already knew him well, it seems. They were separatists, but they were Abkhazian, and they may have or not have been Estonian too. It's hard to know. But anyway, the Estonians came all the way down to Abkhazia to get some free land. Well, they created their own culture. You can see they're quite civilized. I mean, they're civilized, but they probably were always civilized. But I mean, they're doing well, right? They have nice clothes. They're wearing hats. There's a lot of them. They have children. So they created a whole world and seemed to be quite happy to stay there. And they were there for a good 100 years before this war broke out. They lived peacefully. They created their own culture, and it seems like they never lost their Estonian identity. They had their own schools. They had their language. I'm sure they also learned Russian. I mean, they were there. And what I find odd is that unlike the U.S., where we really seem to push assimilation on people, I don't know what Georgia or Abkhazia, hoped for from them, but it seems to me they kept their Estonian identity. If you remember when Nika, who was a Georgian, was across the table from Ahmed, who was a Chechenian mercenary, and they were, hating each other, Nika said, you're on Georgian land. And Ahmed said, no, I'm sitting on an Estonian chair in an Estonian house. And the Georgian didn't agree with that. So that's how they got there. It's really interesting that that's how they got there, and it's interesting that they didn't really it didn't seem they fought with anyone, but they also lived together and they didn't assimilate. It sounds like they contributed, but I don't know how much they assimilated, so I don't quite understand that aspect of the culture, whether that was just them or whether Abkhazia didn't encourage them to assimilate, or whether they played both sides of the street because they speak German. I mean, they speak Russian, obviously, because they all communicate. So when the disputes and the violence started, though, they were, believe it or not, they were repatriated back to Estonia. Estonia actually came and got them in a way and helped them get back to Estonia. I mean, these people probably didn't even know Estonia anymore. I mean, they were there for 100 years. Families had come and gone, and they learned the language. They may have had their own schools, but they probably also were part of Russian society. But they Estonia could see they were in trouble, and I think Russia contributed too in helping them leave. So that was a nightmare, as far as I can tell from my research. So here they had a nice culture, they were a community, and then before you know it, they were being repatriated and they were on the road. And, they obviously suffered because of this. And I remember in the movie, everybody else left. All their families left. Ivo's granddaughter left. Margus's wife, I guess, left. The doctor's wife had left. Everyone left. And the only people that stayed were the doctor, who then left, Ivo, who's the oldest guy in this movie, and Margus. So, as in all conflicts, the civilians tried to flee the violence, and you saw in the movie how it was really dangerous. You just didn't know who was going to come to your door. So, of course, they wanted to get out, and that caused a lot of suffering for these Estonians. And don't you wonder, like, when they got back there, they go like, well, who are you? You've been gone like 100 years, your family. So, I don't know, I guess they took them back in, but I can't imagine it was fun. It's unfortunately a little bit like if you're a Mexican and you get deported from the US, but you grew up here, like the DACA people, you grew up here, you don't know Spanish. You don't know Spanish. You don't have any relatives here. You don't know anything, and then you sort of wind up in Mexico. Okay, now what do you do? So I don't know that story, but I'm saying it had to be pretty bad. Okay, so most of them accepted the repatriation. It was just safer, except a few. Like I said, Ivo and Margus. Estonia was a good 1,700 miles from this village in Abkhazia. The village stays unnamed. I'm not sure where it was supposed to be, but there was a major Estonian presence in Salme, and I'm thinking that maybe this was on the outskirts of Salme. I looked again when I saw the film to look for street signs or town signs, and I couldn't find any. Maybe one of you found that. But the violence was over the identity of Abkhazia in the end. Was it a Georgian country or was it its own country? So I'm going to skip over the film first, tell you about the history because I think it's really relevant. Like what? Okay, so they had a war. People were killed and tortured and hurt on both sides. There were no innocent parties here. The Russians killed people. The Abkhazian separatists killed people. The Georgian kills people. It was very, very, very bad. So, okay, what happened as a result of the war? I don't know if you know this, but and a lot of this, obviously, the civilians left if they could. Well, Abkhazia insisted that it was an autonomous republic. They declared their independence in 1992, which is right during this conflict. But I don't know how far they got with that. I was just saying we're independent. But they formally declared it in 1999, so it took a while. The violence was not just there. I mean, the violence was all throughout the former Soviet Union. One irony is that if you remember the mercenary Ahmed, he jumps in his truck at the end and he drives back to Chechnya because he misses his family, and that's a long drive. Well, unfortunately, 2 years later, violence broke out there. So if he had been a real person, he survived one more, but who knows what happened in the second one. So what happened to Abkhazia in the end? That's a good question, because what we want to think about is all this violence and hate and fighting and everybody, hurting everybody else. Did something good come out of it? Well, unfortunately, after all this violence, even though Abkhazia declared their independence, Russia maintains a military presence there. Russia recognizes its independence, but Georgia continues to claim it. And almost all the countries that are part of the UN recognize Abkhazia as part of Georgia. So all that violence didn't really achieve very much. Now, Abkhazia did receive formal recognition as an independent state, but only by 6 or 7 of the 193 United Nations member states. That's really sad. So they end up calling this a forgotten war because I don't have the fatality count in front of me, but it was very high. And in the end, what was it all about? You know, they call it the forgotten war. There are monuments there to it, but I never heard of it. Did you ever hear of it? Did you ever hear of that war? I didn't. I knew there was
Nope.
some violence because of the fall of the regime. And now, um, what's happening now? Well, the village of Salme, which I'm assuming was, they're probably trying to hint that that's where this took place. Well, most of the inhabitants now are Abkhaz, and most of the Estonians were repatriated back to Estonia during the war. So the effects of the war are still visible, but the Estonians aren't there anymore. So here's an this is now. This is now. So it's still very bad. I mean, they had some online things about should you visit Abkhazia, what would a tourist do, and you know it would be maybe inexpensive, but you can still see the war. There were a lot of pictures about that. So that's all I want to share in background. So let's talk about the film, okay? I see that somebody said, "Isn't it interesting how Christians were desired in the countries?" Well, yeah, the Tsar, because the Tsar wanted it to be a Christian nation, and Orthodox Christianity was very strong in that period of time in the Russian Empire. So he just wanted it. He wanted his country to be Christian. And actually, Putin is going back to that now. And they're talking about glory days. I don't know if you saw the last Olympic Games where they made a big deal out of their traditional culture in Russia. And then somebody asked, where did the Abkhazians go who were expelled? Actually, I don't know. I think they probably just went everywhere. I mean, there's plenty of places they could go in Russia and all those other small Eastern European countries, but I don't really know. That was in the 1800s, but that's a great question. Okay, so let's take a breath, and I hope that helped you gave you background. If anybody wants to ask a question about the background, other questions, just put it up there on chat. Okay, so let's look at the film. Again, I hope that gives you a better sense of what we're watching. So this is a 2013 Estonian Georgian film. So clearly they cooperate now because they got together to make the film. And Ivo is Estonian. It was filmed in Georgia. Actually, it did very well. I don't know about money, but I'm saying it won awards. It got Best Foreign Language Film at the Academy Awards. It was among 5 nominated films at the 72nd Golden Globe Awards, and it was also nominated as Best Foreign Language Film. So it's a traditional film. It's not a violent film like we're used to in the U.S., where I think the violence is often gratuitous. I mean, the violence made sense here. As I really didn't even want to watch it another time because I was like, I don't want to see that violence, but I made myself watch it because it was important for me to understand the details better once I had done the research. So, in this movie, it depicts what's left of the Estonian population as the war started. Like I said, the Russians support the Abkhaz separatists. Ivo, if you remember, it starts with Ivo, right? And this is, if you haven't seen the movie, this should help you a little bit, or if you have, it'll remind you. Ivo's a carpenter. I mean, he was a general carpenter, but what he's doing now is making crates for his friend Margus, who has a very nice, lucrative tangerine grove orchard. So, as you remember, Margus wants to get those tangerines in boxes and shipped out because it's a lucrative product before he leaves. He is going to leave. It seems like Ivo doesn't plan to leave, although I can't imagine why he would stay there as the last Estonian in that village. So he's helping. Now, we learn at the end that Ivo doesn't want to leave because his son was killed in the early phases of the warfare. So that, in the end, even though he has a granddaughter who went back to Estonia, Margus just stays to harvest his crop, and then he's going to go join his family. That's his plan. So so what happens? We see conflict erupting, and I'm going to go over a little bit about the violent episodes because when I saw it, I thought, who are these people? Who's fighting with who? I don't get it. They all look the same to me. I mean, they do look like they're Eastern Europeans. They're the same ethnicity. They're all from that part of the world, and they're speaking Russian. So, two soldiers. There's a skirmish, and two soldiers. I think 4 or 5 are four are killed. 2 are Georgian, and 2 are Abkhazian. I mean, no, Chechnyan. Yeah, Russian. Right. So, Ivo takes them in and tries to bring them back to health, which of course they would have died if he hadn't have done that. But what happens? Instead of being grateful to him, which they are somewhat, they want to kill each other, right? So they say when they're better, they're going to kill each. Well, Ahmed definitely says when I'm better, I'm going to kill him. And Ivo makes them pledge that they won't do so on his property. Remember that? So but they sit together, they eat together, they hate each other, but over time, Ivo kind of gets them to a new place. And he does such a good job, and I'm just summarizing the plot, that later on, Ahmed protects Nika from Abkhaz separatists, who the Chechens are supporting, by saying that Nika is a Chechen. Now, Nika is a Georgian, but they tell him not to talk, that he got hit in the head and he can't talk, so they accept him. So they've formed enough of a relationship that Ahmed protects Nika. Then later on, Nika protects Ahmed from Russian ground forces. If you remember, they're in uniforms, and the ground forces don't believe that Ahmed is on their side. They think, remember, they say something in Chechen, and he says something that offends them. But Ahmed is on their side, and if you remember, Ivo runs out and goes, "No, don't kill him. He's on your side." But they don't believe him. They don't believe Ahmed. They don't believe Ivo. So Nika actually defends Ahmed, and they were hating each other, and he actually jumps up and defends them. And then in the end, Ahmed, of course, Margus is killed. Nika is killed by a wounded Russian ground force who then dies. Who's killed. So Ahmed and Ivo are left. His best friend Margus is gone. Ibrahim died. The other 2 soldiers died. In the end, it's just Ahmed and Ivo, and the 2 of them bury Nika and Margus. That's how it ends. And if you remember, they have a cross, and Ahmed's going like, "I don't know where to put this," and Ivo says, "Okay." So in the end, Ahmed decides to drive home to Chechnya, and if you remember that Nika was putting his finger in a cassette tape. Remember cassette tapes? It got all messed up and he was winding it back in. Well, when Ahmed leaves in his truck, he has a cassette tape player and he's playing the cassette. And what it is it's Nika's, and it's the music of Georgians. It's a song called "The Paper Boat" that was very popular with Georgian soldiers. So that's the plot in a nutshell. Okay, now somebody's asking, were the Estonians who were repatriated successfully? How many were there, and how were they accepted back in Estonia? That's what I want to know too. And I'm just being honest. I don't really know that, but when I looked at Estonian websites, there was no mention that it was a problem. So I'm assuming that they took pity on them and brought them back in. And I don't have numbers, except that there's hardly any Estonians left. And so if there were a few thousand, now there's like 2%, 0.02% left. So pretty much everybody went back. Okay, let's talk about the violence in this film, which I don't believe is gratuitous at all. You might be wondering, like I did, like, who are these people? It's scary. Somebody drives up every, few minutes or days, and you wonder, are they going to be good? Are they going to kill us or what? Well, the first armed presence, I'm just going to tell you what they are. The first armed presence are Ahmed and Ibrahim. They go into Ivo's construction barn and they demand food. And he they say who they are. They're here, they're to support Abkhaz. He gives them food. Okay, now you remember that there was a second armed presence. It was a skirmish between the Chechens that Ahmed and Ibrahim are part of and some Georgian volunteers that Nika is part of. And they shoot each other up, and all but two die, but one on each side, Nika and Ahmed. The next set of violence is when the Abkhaz separatists burst into the house and they pretend that Nika is Chechnyan. The next set of violence is Russian ground forces, and well, there is some shelling that you don't see, but it destroys Margus's tangerine orchard and his house. And then the final violence we see is from Russian ground forces, who are supporting Abkhaz and the separatists. They don't accept Ahmed as a Chechen fighting on their side, and they decide to kill him, even though he says he's from their side. And Eva rushes outside and goes, "He's one of yours. He's one of yours." So that results in the death of Margus and Nika. So those are the armed conflicts. Okay, so here's a question. I thought the one who wanted to kill to avenge his friend was Ivo's friend. I don't think anybody was Ivo's friend at the beginning except Margus, and Margus did not talk about killing. Ahmed, the Muslim Chechnyan mercenary, wanted to avenge his friend Ibrahim, who they had been together in a truck. Son, I don't know if anybody was. Margus did not offer to fight. Ivo felt he, seemed like he was not a fighter and he was too old. So I don't really know. His son was killed. Maybe the separatists, the Abkhazians, maybe they mentioned that and maybe I forgot. Maybe they came in to say, we're going to avenge your son. That could be. Okay. So what about religions? This is Worthington Interfaith Neighbors. What does religion matter? Does it have a place in this film? I mean, is it just tangential? Okay. Let's talk about faith. Okay, so who's what? Again, remember that the Tsar brought in Christians. The Estonians were Christians. He brought them in. So we can assume that the Estonians in this movie are Christian. I don't see much in Margus or Ivo's habitats that shows a lot of Christianity. But Nika is a Georgian, and he's Christian because he has a little cross around his neck and he tries to tuck it back in his shirt, if you remember, when they're sitting at the table. Ahmed is definitely Muslim. He prays on his rug, and he talks about Allah. So he's real obvious. But is religion really the issue? Are they really fighting over religion? Well, it seems like they were getting along pretty well when they talked religion because Nika says, he puts his cross away, and then Ahmed says, oh, that's okay, we respect other religions. And then Nika says, well, we respect other religions too. So they're not hating each other because of religion. Okay, so let me see what other questions there are before we get into actual questions here. Is this an example of trying to force everyone into the same culture or philosophy rather than accepting a multicultural society? I think it was multicultural without a problem, except that Russian and communist control probably wanted them all to speak Russian, be educated by the system, and be in the Communist Party if at all possible. And the Communist Party wasn't necessarily pro-religion; it was the opposite. So perhaps they just let that happen under the radar. Okay, then somebody says, I thought religion per se was not the issue so much as personal honesty in their word. Right, we're going to get to that, and I think that's true. We're going to get to that in a minute. Okay, so what I want to do now is throw out several themes with questions. I'm going to ask, and then we can talk about this, or you can chat. We'll see what Linda Kay wants to do with it. But anyway, the questions, the first theme is characterization. Second theme is values and morality. The third theme is what about religion? The fourth theme is what wins? What wins in this film? And then finally, the relevance to our own situation in the U.S. And that I think is very, very important. So now I want to open this up for discussion. And I think Linda Kay and I agreed that we would start with the chat, but we would soon open it up for discussion where you raise your hand. So Linda Kay, what do you want to do?
I'd like for everybody to put their video back on.
Video?
Yeah, put your
Oh,
video
they're on
back
video.
on.
Yeah, right. You put your videos back on, right?
Then
Okay.
that way I can see you.
So I hope I gave you enough background to revive your memory of the film, fill in the background, and now I'll throw out some questions that I think is why this film meant so much to those of us on the committee and why we chose it. So I'll start with an easy one, like a lowball one, which I think always gets people thinking. Which character do you resonate with the most? Which character do you dislike the most, and why? Let's start with that. So you can raise your hand and unmute yourself, or Linda Kay will unmute you.
Or I can do it either way. Okay, since nobody else is saying anything, I liked Evo, and the only reason why, because he seemed to be the only steady, consistent personality in it. He would fix the food, he would put it in front of him, he'd go do the woodworking, building his crates, and it was kind of like he didn't really get into discussions with them either. I mean,
Yeah.
he didn't have a lot to say. He was just that steady force in everything that was going around. And I guess I felt too that knowing that his son had been killed and all this was going on, I just kind of felt for him. I felt a lot of sadness that, and in the end, when he decided to stay there, I had even more sadness because it's like, what did he have?
Right. What did he have? Everyone left. I
Mhm.
know. I liked Evo a lot. Evo's actually Estonian, and he was given an award for this. He was called the best actor in 100 years of Estonian filmmaking. That's a
Wow.
so everyone. I mean, people liked him. Did anybody not like Evo or feel he was a fool or something? He's taking in these wounded people that hate each other. Hey, don't be shy. Raise your hand,
Yeah.
and we'll call on you. Somebody said, isn't it similar to the Bosk situation? Without Soviet control, old enmities resurface? That sounds likely. Well, was there anybody you disliked? Like you really just couldn't get used to them and you didn't like them ever? Raise your hand if you want to just make a comment. Okay. Pat, unmute yourself. Linda, unmute her.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Okay.
Um, Back to Eva for a moment. I felt that he demonstrated the power of personal relationships over political affiliation. And each of the men he brought together, I think, really wanted his approval. They had seen him as kind of a father figure. And so all the conflict eventually melted away because of the power of his influence on them personally. So I felt that the film showed the difference that one person can make in peacemaking. And that both Ahmed and Nico, I disliked at the beginning because they were so obstreperous, but it was so interesting to watch them transform during the film and become more likable.
Yeah. I think Bill McDonald had his hand up too.
Okay, Bill, go ahead. Wait.
Yes, thanks. Well, I liked Evo and I liked Margus. I'm intrigued about the tangerines and why they were so important. They were pretty much seemed like the cash crop for Evo and Margus. And I was wondering why there wasn't more fighting over the resource of tangerines. Apparently nobody was interested in that.
And then they blew him up, well, inadvertently.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But I liked
Right.
Evo and Margos both. I didn't care for either of the either Ahmed or the other guy. I forget his name.
Nika.
Nika. And I was curious about how much time they actually spent there because
Yeah.
it would seem to me to take a long time to get those two people to the point where Nika was really trying to save Ahmed's life.
Yeah.
So but I didn't get an idea of whether it was a matter of weeks or months, but it all seemed to take place during this harvest time for tangerines, which can't be
Yeah.
too long.
No, I don't. They don't tell you how long it took. They were there, but I mean, they had time to be for the doctor to come in and care for them and take medicine. So it had to be longer than a few days. Dan raised his hand.
Question I had with, and I don't, the Georgian soldier, he shot the Russians. Would he have shot fellow Georgians? And
Oh, if they
question,
were to save Ahmed, yeah.
yeah, would he? I doubt it.
Well, Ahmed was shooting his own people essentially.
Yeah,
Well, he was also defending his life because they didn't believe him.
it's
Yeah.
it's an interesting question. I mean, it certainly was easier to kill the enemy to protect a personal friend.
Right. Another question. Did you notice there were no women in this film? Why do you think that is? Zero women in the film. Why? Sharon's got a
Sharon?
I go. I about the women, I kept waiting for something to happen about his granddaughter, about Evo's granddaughter. Like maybe she lived close by, or maybe she was hiding out, or I didn't know what. But I thought that was strange. But I guess he stayed because his son was buried there.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know where the granddaughter was, but I kept waiting for her to show up somehow.
Well, she seemed to be married and living. Maybe she went back to Estonia because he said she's fine. Don't worry. I don't worry about her.
Uh-huh.
That's a
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, I was surprised at that because that seemed to be, I mean, besides the tangerines, a real link for him
Right.
to life, really, some kind of normal life.
Yeah. Let me move us on to values and morality.
Mhm.
When I first saw this, I thought, this is depressing. It doesn't work out. Eva went through all this trouble. He was wonderful. And then they got killed. So I was like, I don't even want to see this again. Well, I mean, I did see it again.
Mhm.
And I saw more when I saw it again. So my question is, what morals seem to be at stake here?
Mhm.
And what specific positive characteristics are evidenced in the film? At first, I saw just pointless niceness that didn't help. In the end, they got killed, and I was like, "That's no good. I'm not happy here. This is terrible." I mean, I'm an American. I always expect a happy ending, right? That's what we're trained to expect, and we like that in film. But when I went back over it, I saw there were quite a lot of positive character traits that are evidenced by the people in the film. Did you see that? What do you think you saw that might be positive?
Linda, may I speak up here? My take on it is that the fact that some of the characters died at the end is not relevant to the central topic that there had been a victory with respect to the reconciliation or at least acceptance of diversity or of different views, or the fact that they were on opposite sides for two of the characters. In other words, the world was revolving around the sun outside of their intimate relationship and that particular narrative. And isn't that, in fact, what happens in real life? You may very well be reconciled with internal or intimate issues, but at the same time, there may be things going around outside that could cause your death, or it could cause the separation of your family. So I didn't find both messages as being inconsistent outside of a highly, and you certainly would know that, Linda, highly moralistic narrative that you might find in the Hollywood movies of the 1950s, for example, or before. So that was my take on it. I didn't find it necessarily inconsistent. I do want to make a comment concerning an earlier comment regarding the separatist movement, but I'll leave that on the table for right now.
Okay, well, does anyone else want to comment on positive character traits that either were there already or developed over the period of the film?
I would.
Okay.
I think that the central focus, I agree with Joe on what he said, that the ending was almost, I mean, the ending was reality, but what was happening in that house was based on the owner of the home. And he was a very powerful person, even though he said very little, did not force people to do anything. He made two statements, two direct statements. You're not going to kill each other in my house, and you're not going to comment about my daughter. Other than that, you know, he didn't exhibit any external signs of power. So to me, the signs of power were internal, that were coming through to people because they saw that he was consistent internally and externally. He was a peaceable person. He was a peaceful person. And that was, even though this is a war movie, I came away with a tremendous peaceful feeling at the end of it because of him.
Oh, wow. Anybody else? I actually saw lots of positive character traits the second time I watched it. Whereas the first time I just was bummed out.
Yeah. Bill, did you have something you wanted to say?
Sharon had her hand up.
Okay.
And Bill does too.
Yeah.
I just wondered if I found him, I mean, totally moralistic, and I think he was respected for that, you know, by the others. But was he Christian then? Because his morals, his values seemed to be Christian, and I didn't know if that's where they came from.
The only thing we can answer to that is that he had a cross that Ahmed wanted to place on the grave. And I don't know whether the cross came from his son's grave or whether he just had it around, but there was a cross. And so and he was Estonian, and they were a Christian, the Estonian. So I'm assuming, yes, he's Christian, but he doesn't refer to religion.
Oh, my thought about the morals involved is that once war starts, morals often become lost in the fog of war. Yes, Ivo was a moral person. Apparently, so was Margus, and they should be commended for their efforts. But in the end, you know, Margus gets killed because shit happens in war.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. There's so many examples of that in Vietnam, our war in Vietnam, and you know, our war in Iraq, where people just get loose to do immoral acts in the name of, I don't know, their war or what they think their role is. And so I'm not sure. Certainly Ivo's morals were commendable and impressive, but in the end, he could have been killed just as easily as Margus.
Right. He could have. Right. Anybody else? Oh, Pat.
Well, I felt that Evo demonstrated a deep respect for the sanctity of life,
Yeah.
which
Mhm.
in a war scene was very powerful because that then juxtaposed against the senseless killing. And I wondered if the two men couldn't imagine in the end quickly taking the other's life after Evo had worked so hard to save it.
Right.
So
Right.
I felt that that was his moral demonstration that he didn't
Right.
say anything about, but was very evident.
Right. So I saw some other things that would surprise me that I didn't see at first. We already mentioned peacemaking. We mentioned the sanctity of life. Um, and what about integrity? Like even Ahmed, who was just happy to kill Nika, once he gave his word that he wouldn't do it under the roof, he kept he had integrity. So that's another value. And then one thing well, there's loyalty because once they became they know each other, they were loyal to each other. They were former enemies. I think willpower, because Ahmed just really he was using his willpower to not kill Nika. He really wanted to. I mean, he didn't stop wanting to until the very end, I think. Um, their shared humanity seemed to grow. Remember, they talked about music and their families, and Nika was an actor, so they started sharing humanity. And Evo showed a lot of courage. You got to admit. I mean, even at the beginning, Ahmed like sensed his courage, and he goes, "Too bad brave men like you grow old." Remember that?
Yeah.
And it's like, how does he know this? Because Evo didn't seem scared of him. And here's these two guys coming in asking for food. I mean, he could have been passing out with fear, but he acted, oh, yeah, sure. Okay, come on in. We saw compassion for sure from, and the just, the sanctity of life, like you said, he had compassion on these two guys. They're going to die. We've got to bring him in the house. And, he took it was a lot of courage for him to do that.
Yeah.
And then the one of the things I really found interesting, and maybe because a lot of us are older or retired, was the feelings towards the elderly. And I don't mean he was real old. He wasn't.
Yeah.
But
Right.
what I saw is he's an older person. He's not shown as useless. He's shown as very, very well functioning. I mean, even the doctor, the three of those guys were not the youngest people in the film, but they pushed a van off the hill. They were making things. They were like out there doing what they had to do for life. And even Ahmed and Nika both said they respected the elderly, especially Ahmed, the Muslim, said that. And so they would treat him with respect. So I like that. And that's, being in the US, I'm like, I wish it was like that here. That would be nice, instead of like, oh, yeah, you're useless. Poof.
Yeah, you don't matter.
Yeah. Go enjoy yourself, go play golf, but forget about being useful. You're not, you're too old.
Discounted, really.
Yeah, discounted, right. Here's somebody said, Evo, the peacemaker, asked, who gave you the right to kill? So his confrontation and total acceptance of the two injured soldiers helped them both learn to live together and appreciate each other. Yeah, right. All right, let's move on, if you don't mind, to religion. I don't have too many questions about religion, but just a few, because I really want to get to the last two questions are what won? Was there a winner here? But as far as religion, do you think religion is the source of this violence? Well, what role does religion play? Is it a minor role? Is it a major role? Does it help or hurt Evo's attempt at peacemaking? Does it even matter in this film? There is religion. People have identities, but doesn't make much difference in the film, even whether positive or negative.
The only thing that I come up with and I ask is how, as a Muslim, was it okay for him to kill?
Yeah, right.
I mean,
yeah.
I don't get that from anything that I've ever read,
right.
And where he felt like that was okay, because both of them felt like it was okay to kill.
Ahmed said it was his sacred duty to Allah to kill Nika. I'm like, whoa. Really?
That's heavy.
Wait a minute. Yeah. Because he's praying to Allah, he mentions Allah, Allah's good. He does all the things you'd say, oh, well, yeah, a good Muslim would do that. And then he goes, no, it's actually my sacred duty to kill him.
Mm.
Yeah. Right. But I don't know whether the violence really springs from religion. Do you think it does? I mean, it can. I mean, it happens. But what about in this film?
Well, I think
I don't think religion had a lot to do with this in this film. I really don't. I mean, I know we all know countries where you fight over religion and different beliefs and stuff, but in this particular one, it wasn't about that they were fighting over. So,
Linda, may I suggest something? The film is a 2013 film.
Right.
It's a post 9/11 film. It's a post Arab Spring film. However, the events of the film actually took place much before that.
Right.
And I think that what I can offer is that I believe that religion probably had little to do with the conflict itself. However, we're seeing the film through a different prism, through different lenses of the post 9/11 world. And as a consequence of that, I think it becomes to us, and maybe even to the director and other contributors of the film, screenwriters and so on, a bigger issue than perhaps it should be, as an element of the conflict between the two combatants, so that in fact they could have the same animosity as they do all over the world, Muslim against Muslim, Cubans against Cubans,
Yeah. Right.
and so on, that had nothing to do with religion per se. And that could be one way of interpreting the narrative as it appears on the screen.
Okay. Let me move us along because I really want us in the end to discuss, is there anything we get here from our own situation? Because that'll be the theme of both movies. And I hope you'll come back next Sunday because there's a common theme here. What do we learn that'll help us in our immediate polarized society? But let me ask you one more question, which I found at first to be the answer to be nobody. Because does anybody win here? Remember at one point they're having an outdoor meal. He made shashlik, which is like roasted meat over the fire. And it's almost like they're having a little party, like a barbecue, right? And Ivo insists on making a toast. But what does he toast? He toasts death. And he goes, those two guys are all about killing. So I toast death. And Margot says, I can't toast death. And Ivo insists, yeah, we're going to toast death. So in the end, did death win? Or did life win? Or did nothing win? I mean, how did you feel at the end when those two poor guys got killed? One was going to be an actor, go back home. The other one, just all he wanted was his tangerine and go back to his wife. They weren't doing anything wrong, really. They weren't. I mean,
that depends on what happens to Ivo, which we don't know. He,
right.
As far as we know, but I forgot what I was going to say, so I'll be quiet.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
This is Najma. Two things. A few minutes before we were talking about whether Ahmed wanted to kill the other man because he was a Muslim. I agree with, I think it was Bill who said that this movie has very little to do with religion as far as I could see. I think it's more ethnic, it's more boundaries, it's more geographical dominance,
right.
It's more independence, like so many wars are. They're labeled Muslim wars or Christian wars or any other wars. They're not. They're about power and dominance more than anything else. And I think in this movie, like in all real wars also, and this was of course a real war, I don't think either death wins or life wins. Because life will continue. these people who are going back to Estonia or wherever, the life will continue and death will continue as well. And I think the message which I got from this was that how useless
Yeah.
wars are and
Right.
how silly the people are who wage them and
Yeah.
who try to make it into something which it's not. It's never moral to wage a war, and it's never moral, and it's even more immoral to wage a war in the name of religion. But unfortunately, that's what happens most of the time. A lot of war is waged on that, and it's always about power. If you just go back and you look at all the wars, you'll find that it is always about dominance and power. It's about wealth, dominance, power. Very seldom is it about religion, because whether it's Christianity or Islam, nobody will ever tell you to go and kill anybody else uselessly. And when Ahmad says to this, I want to kill him, it's not because the other man is not a Muslim, it's because he belongs to the group of people he's fighting at that time.
Right.
So that is the reason for wanting to kill him, not because of religion.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it. So my 2 cents.
Right.
Okay.
Well, let's move on to the last section, which I think for us here now is the most important thing. 2 questions. In what ways is our country in a similar situation, and to that, what was happening in the movie, and in what ways is our situation different? And then second, given our own country's increasing polarization, is there anything we can take away from this film? Or what does the film teach us that we can use here and now to decrease the hate and polarization that we've been seeing a lot of in this country?
One important factor is whoever is in power has the ability to control a lot of what goes on in the organization that they have power over. So as we saw with the recently former president, you can do all kinds of things to foment crises and hatred, polarization, increased polarization, and that can, in some cases, increase your power. And so a lot of the wars are fought over who do we want to be in power to control this sometimes multicultural country that we live in. And yeah, so sometimes it seems to have to come down to the use of force.
Thank you. Anybody else? Pat?
Well, I think one thing that's useful on this film that we could learn is the power of building personal relationships in a polarized society. Even if we have to take small connections, that we can rebuild things. We may not be able to change people's minds, but we might be able to understand people by getting to know them.
Evo changed their hearts, which was amazing.
Right.
Sharon?
Well, to me, that's one of the most powerful things of this film is how Evo lived up to his own integrity as a human being and treated people who obviously, were very different from him in a human way. And so the whole issue of, power over contrasted to empowering the best of someone else, to me. And I think that that kind of dynamic certainly can be at work in the tremendous work we have to do with one another about how we use our lives to empower the best of each other rather than the worst.
If somebody came here, just let me make this side comment, but if somebody came here from another country and they looked at us, they would go, what's your problem? You all look the same, you talk the same. I mean, you're multicultural, but you're all American, and why are you fighting with each other? So what I saw in the film originally, I think somebody came here, they go like, I don't get it. Dan had something to say.
Well, back on the religion thing, most of the most of the wars are over like resources, land, and stuff like that. And so they decide to go to war. And then they say, oh, by the way, God, come along with us. You know, bless us. You know, they don't ask God whether they should go to war or not. It's just like, okay, now we have tanks and planes and stuff. And oh, by the way, we have the power of God. And God says that what we're doing is okay.
Yeah.
When they didn't even ask God.
Yeah. The other Dan had a,
Yeah, the question that I've probably struggled with all of my life. You know, most people I meet will say violence is not good. Even the military guys I met, violence is not good, but sometimes it's necessary. And you know, so where do you draw that line? I mean, we saw this in this movie. At that point, the Georgian soldier decided that he needed to do some more violence in order to protect his friend, you know? And so it always seems, you know, we always do that. Now, I was a conscious objector during the Vietnam War. I felt like I had to make that decision. And I'm glad, I'm proud I made that decision. But a lot of other people would say, no, you know, at some time it's necessary. And so how do you deal with this, you know? You know, is the violence that the police have, is it necessary at times? Where do you draw the line?
yeah.
Could I follow up on that? And going
Sure.
to what happened to the Capitol riots and on January 6th,
Right.
Sure.
imagine if our federal government and institutions, democratic institutions, did not have the power or enough power to resist the white supremacists. Where would we?
Sure, I agree.
Yeah.
Uh,
See, I always believed, because this is what I was taught through church, religion, all these other things, is that we live by example, and, you know, that good wins out. And, you know, and I'm at a point in my life, and I think, you know, I'm getting older, and it's like, wait a minute, it doesn't always happen. And yet that's what I've lived most of my life, really believing, you know, that good wins out, and that, you know, if you're a Christian and you love one another, that, you know, it'll work out. But we've seen a lot of instances where that is not the case. And so when I think about where we are today, kind of like in the movie, gosh, all I can say from that is that Eva was the one that lived. You know, the rest of them died. Maybe there is something to that part of just having the values of, yeah, I will not kill, you won't kill in my house, you know, setting standards and expectations. You know, just like we have to do with kids, you set expectations, and you hope that people can abide by them. So I don't know, it left me feeling really, when I think of today and where we are, and left me feeling a little empty, like a lot of my values that I've believed in for a long time really don't play true.
Well, Ahmed lived, and he had learned to respect Nika, and he helped bury Nika. So he did seem like a changed person. That's not a huge change, but it is something.
Well, that was the way I looked at it too. That was where I saw it, to get back to the question of, was there a win in this? And it may not be a huge win, but there was one person who survived, who was not going back into the world with the exact same point of view that he had when he came into that home. I think that's a victory. And the thing that I took away from this too, when I'm looking at the question of how the conflict kind of got resolved in that house, Ivo was not talking about which side he was on and which side was right. in that conflict. There was no discussion of that whatsoever. There was treating one another like human beings. And I think that's, as simple as that sounds, that's where it needs to start. A lot of the conflict we've experienced, in my opinion, over this past year has been people demanding that others believe what they believe.
Yeah.
You can't ever win with that.
And there's a lot of hate where that they're the enemy, we're the good people. On both sides, that's the rhetoric.
Yes, it
Yeah,
is. And
yeah.
it's not constructive ever. And you can't blame the government on that. I mean, you can say, well, that may have been the source of it, but it's individuals who are choosing to be inflammatory in that way.
And like
And
you said, Evo, he never did that. Like you said, Kay.
No, never.
Sorry, I interrupted you. You're
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's what I thought was very important when and very relevant to our country now and to the divisions that we feel. A lot of those divisions are coming from within us when we are so angry that somebody doesn't believe exactly what we believe.
Yeah. Sharon?
I guess talking about how I relate to it in today's, the big example of the taking of the Capitol building, and people that I've talked to, and I do some demonstrating for peace every weekend, and I'm telling you, it's an eye opener.
Yeah.
The violence that people want to throw at a sign that says peace, I mean, it's just astounded me. And I'm thinking that I wonder if there is this underlying anger and violence that in regular times is kind of kept under control, but when it's inflamed and when it's given a direction one way or the other, I mean, the direction is usually by one of the people of power, but it just still amazes me that there is so much violence now, and I honestly was not aware of it before, certainly not before Trump. I mean, before Trump, I was not aware of all of this inner violence, although, to some degree, we're aware of psychology and how that can influence on people's violence and homelessness and poverty, and lots of things can make people be very very violent. But I don't know, it's a different thing now because they've come together in their violence and they just want a way to be violent and they found it.
Can I jump in over here for a minute? This is Najma again, and I just wanted to say that it's. I think what is even more frightening to a person like me who belongs to the minority community is that somebody just now said that, since Trump has come in or whatever, but to me what is very frightening is all the people who are well educated, who are in places of power, who are in the Congress and who should know better, who keep perpetuating this, and that is how it's spreading. One man on his own, no matter how much he may want to do it to enable himself to stay in power, cannot do it unless he has the support of many around him. And that is the more frightening to me, because the people who believe, you have to see, and you have to see who are the people who are believing this and why they are believing it. We can all blame the internet, we can all blame QAnon or whatever we may say, But the point is that these cannot be perpetuated unless they were hearing it from more than one person and hearing it all the time.
Yeah.
And that is the scary part, because to disregard one person or to expose him or his mispronouncements is easier. But to say this about 100 people, then there are going to be millions of people who are going to say, no, 100 people cannot be wrong. So it's a perpetuation, which is scarier than what just one person has done.
Yeah.
It's I was watching something on TV yesterday against the Asians. I'm not an Asian myself, I'm a South Asian. But this China flu thing, this China virus thing,
Yeah.
and I was watching that, and it I'm sorry, but I don't know how to put it, but it's a little bit of a disillusionment, because when you expect so much, you feel more disappointed. And I have seen this before I've seen this many times from where I've come from. And there's an article which I wrote recently, which Linda, I think, was okay, had been kind enough to put on the WIN page as well, Facebook page, if anybody wants to read it. This is exactly what I have experienced. And to see it repeated in a country which I do look up to, and feel that people are just so much more reasonable in their politics, in their dialogue, and then to find that it's not always that is a little disheartening. Thank you for listening.
A lot disheartening.
Well, my husband Joe, who's in and out of the video, is a refugee from Cuba, from the Cuban Revolution, Fidel taking over the country. And the thing he always says when we talk about it, he says, "I'm so disappointed." He always says he's so disappointed because when they came here, his family, he was a child, they expected a lot, and the country did welcome them and everything. So he always says he's so disappointed. And since I'm a theologian, I'm like, well, I mean, there's sin. People do bad things. It's not new. Yeah. So I think if you hold a country in a high regard, then you feel more betrayed when it doesn't live up to what you were hoping for.
I think that's exactly what it is. When you expect more, you feel more let down.
Right.
With politicians in Pakistan, we had grown up with that. We did not have that many expectations. And we said, oh, this is just the way they done their thing. This is the way. But when you do not expect it, then, but you know what? After all is said and done, this is the way of the world. It has been for centuries. We're not going to eradicate war, and we are not going to do away with people fighting for their turf or what they consider their turf at the expense of anybody else. So this is just human nature, and it's going to stay like that. We have not reached that form of evolution yet.
But was Evo successful in changing the heart of those people? I mean, he did do something pretty miraculous, because those two guys hated each other. They didn't know each other.
He was, but then one thing I think that we need to also remember is that people in their individual, when you put two people together, they'll be much better than you put them into separate armies.
Yeah.
So individually, people are good. Human beings on one-to-one is good. When you get to know me or I get to know you, we like each other, we love each other, we become friends. But if you're going to look at me as one of the Muslims who came and blew up the Twin Towers, you're going to hate me.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to think of you only as a person who went and bombarded Afghanistan, I'm not going to like you too much either. Right? But it's when we know each other as people. And that is why what somebody said a little earlier, that we have to get to know each other. It's when those people got to know each other that they were ready to die for each other.
Yeah, they were.
These two were ready to make sacrifices for each other, to put their lives on the line for each other.
They did.
And they had been enemies just a few days before.
Right.
So right. I think the thing is to get to know people, because honestly, at the end of the day, everybody wants the same thing out of life.
And I agree. I think that's very profound. And that's what I've heard, that instead of asking people, instead of assuming people are your enemy and you're going to automatically disagree, find out why they believe what they believe, get behind
Yeah,
that rhetoric.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think the question to ask is, when those two men came into the house and they were both conscious enough to be able to speak, I think they both thought that the other felt they didn't have the right to exist. I think that we have to look at what the root of all hate and violence is, and it's usually, in my opinion, it's a sense that somebody doesn't think that your humanity is of the same value as their humanity.
Yeah.
And that's why I liked this film, because it took it right down to the smallest level possible, rather than looking at this war and that war and these principles and these. It just looked at humanity, because that's where the solution to it is. And as Najma said, that comes about through getting to know each other and understand one another, but most importantly, accept one another as human beings. I think a lot of the violence that has happened in the past year, and I'm probably repeating myself, I think it comes from that, and whether or not leaders fed into that's part of it. But maybe the leaders were addressing what was already there, that there are people who have felt that their humanity is not accepted, and it goes on both sides, because someone thinks one way doesn't mean that they're not as valuable a human being as somebody who thinks the opposite way.
Yeah. I think we need to be wrapping up, but before we do, because this has been a wonderful conversation. I think people have made really profound comments. I just want to ask whether you gained any more insights into the film by learning, or maybe you already knew this, but learning more about the background of it. Did it help you get more out of the film, or did it help you understand our situation better? Dan?
Yeah.
Schumacher?
Oh, I did. That was helpful. I did a little bit of work, but not as much as you did. So I maybe this. I got a question for Linda, and maybe this is not the right time. The divide in the country, really, and particularly among, I want to say, white Christians. Is there much dialogue going on between the so-called Christian evangelicals and the mainstream theologians at that level, or is it just as bad as the other area? And maybe this is not the right time. Just give a yes or no.
Well, I wish there were more conversation going back and forth, and I've advocated for that. But unfortunately, we're so polarized, and that includes in Christianity, that the liberal Christians feel the evangelicals are responsible for all the bad, and the evangelicals feel the liberal Christians are responsible for all the bad. And there's not a lot of cross fertilization and talking here, unfortunately.
At least we're not shooting at each other.
Yeah, at this point,
Yeah.
right. We were in a campground this summer, my husband Joe and I. And one night, we went to bed, and when we woke up, there was this huge Trump sign that was put up on the American flagpole. This campground has a flagpole, and there was a Trump sign put up right under it. Now, nobody confessed to doing it, but we thought about it, and we thought there was a lot of Trump supporters in that campground, but you couldn't know what everybody thought or believed. But we thought, why would somebody do that? Are they trying to be offensive to the people that don't agree, or do they assume that everybody there would say, yay, what a great action you did? And that's what we decided. They probably just figured they're in their bubble. Everybody feels the same way. And so if you raise a flag to Trump right under the American flag, which is insane in itself, everybody would be happy and think you did the right thing. So I think we're all in our bubble, and even in religion, even in Christianity, we're in our bubble, and we just assume everybody agrees with us and that the other people are the enemy, and that's not going to be good for Christianity. In fact, that's how many people are becoming spiritual but not religious, which is one of my specialties, because they say, boy, if that's how you guys act with each other, I don't want any part of it. So this stuff is hurting that particular religion badly.
I want to comment. My sons have both said that. they don't want anything to do with it. They just see
Right.
how what's
Right.
going on.
Right. Would you join this family if you're hating each other? No. Who wants to join that family?
No, they don't hate anybody. They don't want anything to do with the Christianity.
That's what I mean. They look at Christianity and they go like, well, if that's how you feel about each other, you hate each other, then why should I be part of your family? That's crazy. I think it's time to wrap up, but what I'm hoping, I don't want to keep you all night. I mean, you know, it's stressful to keep looking at a screen. Of course, we're all going to go watch TV. I get it, but okay. Anyway, please come next week because, and Linda Kay has probably some wrap up comments, but please come next week because we'll take the same theme and look at it in a completely different film. And Sophia Loren, you can't beat Sophia Loren, okay?
That's right.
She's fabulous at any age. So watch that film and come back and let's pick up the conversation from there.
Yes. I just want to say, Linda, thank you. Thank you. You really put the film, gave us a good foundation and understanding it. And yeah, thank you. Thank you. It was awesome.
You're welcome.
And yes, you have to tell your friends to come join us. Watch the movie this week and get back with us, and we can have even more people enjoy what we got to enjoy this evening. So thank you all. Have a good evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Sunday.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.